despite the overall tension in the region, not only the course of rapprochement did not was not negatively impacted, but actually they doubled down on reaching out to each other. So in that sense, as far as I can see from the Iranian perspective, for example, they see a complementary element to that. And of course, as I mentioned, in the case of Iran, in the case of other countries like Egypt, etc., there's also concrete expectations when it comes to the economic potential of BRICS. Of course, this seems to be something longer term on one hand, and on the other hand, the priorities of different sides seem to be kind of rather different, because for Iran is in need of like investment and also ways to bypass the sanctions. It looks to BRICS in that framework. But the potential for a BRICS currency or investment fund, for example, these are still under discussion. So regional rapprochement on one hand, and also economy on the other hand, these are, I think, concrete elements that different actors in the region are looking to or expecting to gain from cooperating with BRICS.
Thank you, Mirza. Aziz, there has been much talk about within the BRICS Plus about de-dollarization, the creation of new global financial institutions. What do you think is Saudi Arabia's perspective on that?
Thank you. I don't think Saudi has an interest in de-dollarization, because I think it's not in Saudi's interest, and I think understanding the Saudi logic, Saudi doesn't have economically speaking, it doesn't see any utility in trying to reduce any kind of spending power of someone. Instead, it just wants to diversify the amount of spending. And so when it changes the economic system or diversifies it, it sees itself, that's what it sees in its interest. And I think the Saudis here are very rationally motivated rather than ideologically motivated in this sense. And I think what they want to do is that they sense also into this diversification, they see themselves as also part of trying to be a hub. Okay. So trying to be a hub, a global hub. And I think it realizes that, okay, it's not just, it just doesn't want to be a global hub for anybody that uses the dollars or deals with dollars, but it really wants to be a universal hub. And that's part of its language. It's part of its language is universality. We're open to everyone. And so I think, Saudi is going to be, I sense, and I see there's the struggle over Saudi. Who wants to have these, Saudi wants to be in, people are trying to grab Saudi into their own respective blocks. And I think Saudi senses itself that it's big enough to withstand that pressure. And it also has right now enough confidence. There is a certain there's an undoubted confidence that Saudi has that, well, we are now one of the lucrative markets in the world. So rather than being dragged into a market, it's waiting for others to join it. So I think de-dollarization is not in its interest, but not doing anything. So it's going to be more open and universal.
Thank you, Aziz. Nikolai, always on this matter of de-dollarization, Russia has made a proposal in Kazan to give the process a boost. Do you think it can really deliver, also considering Trump's threat on countries that are pushing towards de-dollarization?
Well, definitely it's a part of those measures that I mentioned, aimed at the building up the sanctions evasion schemes to ease the ability of the US and the Western world to implement sanctions and the economic pressure, including with the suggestions, for instance, by the Russians to build up the clearing center for the trade or the institutions to support the investments within the BRICS. Will we see the world without a dollar? Of course not. But at the same time, I would say that the share of non-dollar trade and exchange, it will be growing. And not for the sake of the Russians or the Russian initiatives. After the February 2022 and after the beginning of this global economic confrontation, the countries themselves, they started being care about also hedging their risks. They saw that being dependent on the dollar-euro system and financial relations is not always a good idea, and there is always should be a plan B. And it was clearly demonstrated by the Russian experience. And I'm not promoting here the Russian effectiveness to evade sanctions, don't take me wrong. I'm from the other camp, I would say, who is saying that the current regime is under pressure. But at the same time, just one example, before February 2022, the main promoters of the idea of the de-dollarized world were the Rouge states, Libya, Venezuela, Iran. Well, Russia joined them. But now one of the most effective and most active countries in this world sometimes can be the partners of the West, of the US. So the UAE is actively promoting the idea to use their own dinar in the international trade relations. And it's not the way to pinch the West or has it to create troubles with relations with the West, but rather to hedge their own risks and to give an answer to those changes that are happening in the global economy. Unfortunately, the securitization of the economic relations that happened after February 2022 is changing the world, and sometimes not in favor of those countries that were imposing the sanctions to punish the invader. But we need to accept the world is changing. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikolai. Dongsheng, we mentioned before, China has great economic stakes in the Middle East and North Africa region, but lately, over the past few years at least, it has also shown an interest to engage more in political processes of the region, just to mention the brokering of the deal, for instance, between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And after this year's Beijing declaration, do you think is China willing to further promote its role as an active mediator in the MENA conflicts? And do you think that this expansion of the BRICS towards MENA countries is a sign that China is willing to work more into that direction?
Traditionally, China's interest in the MENA region is basically, only in the economic field, but in the recent years, as you mentioned, in the past several years, China is more and more active in political aspect and security aspect. For example, before the Beijing declaration, back in December 2022, Chinese top leader Xi Jinping, he went to Saudi Arabia and held 3-round summit. And not only a summit between Saudi and China, but also the summit with the other Arabic and Gulf leaders. And soon after that, and partly because of that successful summits, half year later, China mediated the peaceful talk between, as you mentioned, between Iran and Saudi, and which was quite a surprise to the whole world. And which unimaginably recently they even had a joint military exercise together. And that shows the tendency that China is taking more and more active role. And here I would like to point out that in the past, if you look back on the century history of that region, the Western powers rising century ago, the rising Western power, especially Anglo-Saxon power, has practiced divide the role principle in that region, which resulted in a lot of chaos and conflicts and hatreds. But China's attitude and China's approach toward that region is more uniting and enabling, which is very different, opposite from the Western attitude. So in the past several years, we have helped mediate the antagonistic powers like Iran and Saudi, but also they divided 16 different groups in Palestine to have a more united attitude toward outside threats. So that's a political aspect, but also economic aspect, we are also enabling them. The one case that I always bring up is that if you look back, like the year 2000, which is the year before China joined the WTO, if we compare the trade term of that region, which is how much oil you exchange for a typical industrial product like cell phone. Yeah. Back in 2000, you need like 30 to 40 barrels of oil for an average cell phone. But today, you only need 3 to 4 barrels of oil for one smartphone, average smartphone. So I bring that political cases and economic cases together to show that China's attitude is more enabling and uniting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dongchen. Thank you very much. One last round of questions, Hamid Reza. I will come to you. So in Iran, in the recent election of a reformist president has boosted hopes for Tehran's improved dialogue with the West. With West, I mean primarily the United States, but I would also say European powers. Do you think that now Iran's BRICS membership will take its toll on its relations with the West?
I think looking at the current state of relationship between Iran and the EU, there's little we can expect in terms of negative impacts of BRICS specifically, in concrete terms, because on one hand, we already have, kind of pre-existing cycle of distrust and tensions, and it's been ongoing for quite some time. The US withdrawal from the JCPOA, the failure of INSTEX, for example, to provide economic benefits for Iran, then Iran supporting Russia in its invasion of Ukraine with drones, potential missiles. So the relationship is now in a state that it has never been before in terms of the tensions. So in that sense, I don't think this specific issue of Iran's BRICS Plus membership can have a significant impact, but it is rather a sign of where we are, because this look to the East policy, so-called look to the East policy, has been established cornerstone of Iranian foreign policy for years. But what we have seen in the past few years has been some sort of institutionalization of look to the East, institutionalization in both terms, or in both meanings, like looking at institutions and also, state institutions as a whole. Pursuing this policy. So again, as I said, it goes beyond this or that administration. And in the best case scenario, even when the current administration, Pezeshkian and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, when they spoke about improvement, then, for example, Araghchi elaborated that Europe is not a priority. With the United States, it's about managing the tensions. And again, that was the look to the East that came to attention. So that's how I see it. It can, of course, in terms of symbolism, sort of intensify those negative views, and it should, I think, on the Western side, that Iran is increasingly siding with adversarial or at least rival powers, especially with Russia. But again, in concrete terms, as I said, I don't think that it's going to, this specific factor is going to be an independent factor in the relationship.
Thank you very much, Hamid Reza. Aziz, now back to you. A similar question, actually, to the one that I just asked to Hamid Reza. So Saudi Arabia's potential membership in the BRICS Plus would probably bring it closer to what is largely perceived, as we said before, as an anti-Western alliance. Do you think this is the reason why Riyadh is hesitating?
That's one, that could be one reason. That could be one reason. I think, again, we're talking about here an aspect of constant of balancing. And I think something that Saudi has done very well in the Saudi foreign policy and the Saudi ruling elite has balanced situations and balanced its interests very well. Personally, as a researcher of Saudi policy, of Saudi foreign policy, I've kind of looked at the main mechanism or the vehicle of this balancing, and language was a very useful go-to for the Saudi ruling elite historically to really balance its interests. And we're going to see this. We're going to see how Saudi depicts BRICS, its relationship with BRICS. So I've even heard sometimes in meetings where, BRICS in an American audience or a Western audience, BRICS was basically saying, listen, you would want us to be in BRICS because then if you have problems with anybody in BRICS, then you have a friend in BRICS that could help you address these issues. So here, I think the process of language is not to be underestimated, in my opinion. So that's one of the aspects, especially when we're going to have a president now that's in the US that's going to be coming here. So it'll be interesting to see this. But I just want to mention one point quickly about the role of China, and what I think what we could consider the role of China in brokering the Saudi Iranian deal as well is a diversification of international actors in the region. And for me, the point that I want to communicate in particular is not just the role of the diversification of international actors, but the effect of it structurally on the region, which helped boost a particular regional agency. Now, a regional agency that still is precarious, that still needs some help, but you could see that in this aspect of trying to boost a regional agency, trying to say, listen, let us work together. We need to be talking together in the region. And I think this was facilitated and regional agency was boosted somewhat slightly. We could debate the extent of this boost because there was a diversification of international actors. And that's what I think China offered at that time.
Thank you very much, Aziz. Nikolai, now another question to you. Actually, Aziz introduced well the question that I was going to ask. You are condemned to be the Russian voice in the panel, but you are actually an expert on the Gulf region. So do you think that the BRICS expansion to Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, will have the potential to affect the equilibrium of power in the region? What should we expect, especially from as I said, the joining of the UAE and potential joining of Saudi Arabia?
Oh, thank you very much for finally addressing to my major specialization. People are deceived by my accent. We believe somehow that I'm a Russia expert. I'm not. Definitely the joining of the BRICS or the work with the BRICS in the format that Saudi Arabia has chosen, it can be in favor of the interests of the Gulf states, and specifically from the economic point of view. We are repeating Russia here is too often, but BRICS is actually not that much about Russia, but rather about the platform through which you can communicate and interact. And from this point of view, for the Gulf states, it's specifically interesting that this organization, this structure, allows you to talk to the main oil consumers. And given those processes of the fourth global energy transition that was accelerated after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and the strategies of these states aimed at the transformation of their economies, they need to build up even tighter connections with India, with China. And if, for instance, when we're talking about India, we're talking about the large consumer markets. In case of China, it also represents a very interesting opportunity for these states in terms of the transformation of their own economies. It's not only about even trade of oil that helps to maximize the petrodollars and to reinvest them in the reform programs. It's not even about closing connections to China itself or Chinese money going to the GCC economies. It is about the fact that right now China is becoming one of the active and massive suppliers of technologies and equipment necessary for the development of the sustainable energy resources. And it's challenging Europe in this direction. And from this point of view, another window through which these states can talk to China, can interact, and maybe even build up stronger relations within those transport initiatives that are offered by Beijing and supported by other players. That's what is drawing them to this organization. That's what might be extremely useful for them in the future.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. Dongsheng, you have the responsibility to close the panel now with the $1 million question. So Donald Trump will soon be back to the White House, and its foreign trade and energy policies are likely to be disruptive. Will Trump's approach translate into more BRICS or less BRICS? What do you expect?
Yeah, so thank you. Donald Trump's coming back to power is a big issue for not only China, but also both MENA region and the whole Europe. And because I believe his policy and expectation on his policy is making huge differences right now. And from what we hear and from what he have already promised, I believe his second presidency will make the global tariff higher and the global inflation higher and less global governance, less international cooperation, and hopefully less wars. Because according to some of the news, he's very eager to achieve Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah, so I wish he could achieve that. And lower energy price, because to hedging against the higher inflation, he's going to pushing down the energy price for various ways, maybe some more pressure on the Middle East, but more carbon emissions. So that's what we're expecting right now. But to less or more BRICS expansion, I personally believe that's almost irrelevant because BRICS expansion and deeper integration has its own momentum because it's the will and interest of the member states and more broadly, the whole global South. They want a platform, as mentioned before. The integration of the BRICS will not be that much influenced by the domestic politics and foreign policy of the United States.
Thank you very much, Dongsheng. And we finished ahead of time, so I think the organizers will be happy. Thank you very much. Please join me in a round of applause to our speakers.